They dumped me in a nursing home like I was yesterday's trash. But what they didn't know was, I wasn't finished yet. Before I dive into the whole story, make sure you hit subscribe and drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. I want to hear from my sisters. Now, let's go back to the moment that flipped everything upside down. The day they took me away, the sky was this flat, lifeless gray, the kind that sits heavy on your chest like bad news you haven't heard yet. I should have known then that something was off. That morning, Karen called. My sweet-talking Swedish sugar pie, claiming she and the boys, David and Luke, were dropping by to help me organize. Help. I should have known better. I sat at my kitchen table, the one where I used to braid their hair, tutor them in math, cut birthday cakes. I even poured 4 cups of coffee like it was some kind of family meeting. Foolish me. I wore my pink sweater, the one George always said made my cheeks glow. I even fixed my lipstick using the toaster as a mirror. Imagine that. I just wanted to look nice. I still wanted to be loved by them. The door slammed, louder than it needed to. Karen came in first, all stiff and businesslike, with that tight face she wore when she wasn't being honest. David walked in, eyes glued to his phone. Luke was last, holding a bunch of papers that already made my stomach twist. Mom, Karen began. We've been talking. Isn't that always how it starts? Right before everything shatters. Her voice went soft, almost babying me, as she explained they'd found this wonderful place for me, a fancy resort-style facility out in the hill country. Sounded like some ad for a spa. I blinked, heart racing. I'm not going anywhere, I said quietly. This is my home. Luke cleared his throat and slid the papers across the table. Mom, you've been forgetting things. We just want to protect you. Protect me? From what? My own life. I wanted to scream, throw that betrayal back in their faces. But I just stared at my hands. The same hands that made their lunches, sewed their Halloween costumes, held them through fevers and storms. Hands that worked 2 jobs when George passed just to keep a roof over us. You already signed the power of attorney, Karen said gently. My knees gave out. I didn't remember signing anything, but I had been tired lately. Days sometimes blurred. I misplaced small things, sure, but nothing dangerous. I trusted them. They were my babies. I never thought they'd twist that trust. Within an hour, my bags were packed. They didn't even let me choose which photos to bring. Just one suitcase. That house, my house, filled with love and struggle and memories, taken from me in a single afternoon. The ride to the facility was quiet. David drove. Karen sat beside him, fingers dancing on her phone. Luke rode in the back with me, avoiding my eyes the whole way. Mom, you'll like it. Bingo nights, movies, he muttered. I felt like laughing or maybe slapping him. I did neither. The place was beige and sad, squished between a gas station and a dry cleaner. No trees. No flowers. Just concrete and dull walls. A nurse came out smiling too wide, clipboard in hand. That first night, I cried into my pillow so no one would hear. Not because of the bed or the food or the cold. But because my children had stopped seeing me as a person. To them, I was just a problem to be dealt with. But I don't stay down for long. I stayed quiet at first, just watching. The staff meant well but were stretched thin. The other residents, quiet, faded souls in cardigans, sat like shadows in time. Then I saw Ruth. She was in the common area, laughing like a bandit during poker with a nurse. You bet your lunch on that hand, baby, she cackled. For the first time in weeks, I smiled. She caught my eye. Freshly betrayed by family? She asked with a grin. I actually laughed. Ruth reeled me in from that moment. Next came Doi. Sweet as pie, sharp as a blade. A former librarian who missed nothing. Then Maxine, tough, statuesque, with knowing eyes. She'd taught law at a community college until a fall injured her hip. We started sitting together at meals, games, and late nights in the lounge with tea and stories. One night, I told them everything. About the betrayal, the house, the power of attorney. Maxine raised a brow. Did you sign over the deed? I shook my head. No. I think it's still mine. Ruth whistled. Honey, if that's true, you've got fire in your pocket. That's when the spark lit. I wasn't going to rot away in there. They thought they'd erased me, but they were about to see what a mistake that was. I was Eleanor Grace Miller, mother, widow, survivor, and I was about to rise. It all started in that tiny Oak Hills room, barely big enough for a bed and a dresser. I unpacked like a robot, until I opened the last drawer and found my old leather folio. Inside was the deed. Still in my name. No Karen signature. No notary stamp. My fingers trembled. I sat down, papers shaking in my lap. Rage, shame, grief, they all surged up. My children had planned to sell my home. Not out of concern, but greed. I held that deed like it was my last piece of truth. For the first time since George died, I prayed. Not for peace, not for comfort, but for clarity. And it came. The very next morning, Ruth burst into the dining hall. Maxine had returned from her son's wedding and was full of stories. Over breakfast, I pulled Maxine aside and whispered, I need your help. That afternoon, in her private room, we spread out the documents. She studied them, deed, will, the medical POA. You didn't sign the title, she confirmed. They can't sell unless they forge it. My heart pounded. Then I'll sell it first. Maxine stared at me, stunned. You serious? I nodded. I want to live before I die. She smiled. Within days, we had a plan. Ruth contacted an old flame, a real estate agent. Doi helped navigate the phone rules and set up a Gmail on the shared computer. Maxine handled the legal and financial side. Every step made me feel more alive. When Karen called, I played the grateful old lady. But really? I was planning my escape. The house sold quickly. The buyer paid full asking price. Maxine used a contact, an old lawyer who owed her a favor. The money was wired to an account in my name. Doi set it up online. No one suspected a thing. The final move came on a Friday. Ruth bribed a young aide with perfume and pizza. I had one bag, my passport, and 3 one-way tickets. I left a note on my pillow, don't look for me. I've gone to find the life you stole. We rode to the airport in silence. No AC in the Uber. No questions from the driver. The terminal lights made me want to cry. Rome was our first stop, a dream I'd only dared imagine. As the plane rose, I watched the Texas lights sparkle below. I didn't know what was next. But I knew I had nothing left to lose. And that made me powerful. Rome smelled like bread, stone, and something sweet, maybe freedom. I hadn't flown in 20 years. My back ached, but I smiled non-stop. Ruth snored beside me. Doi held my hand. Maxine read a thriller like this was a cruise. We landed in golden morning light. Checked into a modest pension with warm bread and poetry in the window views. Rome didn't blink when 4 silver-haired Americans walked in with barely any luggage. That first day, we walked till our feet hurt. Ruth bartered for scarves, Doi wrote a postcard to a lost love, Maxine charmed a cafe owner. I stood before the Colosseum and let the wind kiss my face. I wasn't anyone's burden. I was alive. But freedom digs up ghosts. On the third night, I opened my email. 10 messages from Karen. The latest? What have you done? I didn't open it. Didn't need to. I could already hear her voice, panicked, angry. Maxine found me on the terrace, wine untouched. You okay? She asked. I don't feel guilty, I whispered, surprised. They had a choice. I just chose myself back. The next day, we took a train to Florence. I stood beneath the Duomo and thought of George. I'd promised to protect our kids. I never thought I'd need protection from them. That night, in our little rental, I found something tucked into my bag. A folder. George's handwriting. 6 letters, written over 5 years. He'd seen it all. Their manipulation. Their entitlement. Conversations with Luke that had scared him. And one last letter, right before his heart gave out. If they've turned on you, fight back. You're stronger than me. I sobbed. Clutched that letter like a lifeline. The next morning, I told the girls. Ruth said, then we raise hell. Maxine knew someone in media. Doi said, you're not alone. Others need this story. And that's how my quiet escape became a cause. Jack Winston helped us write it all up and sent it to a journalist, Megan Luce. She had a podcast and a mission. Days later, she called. She wanted to meet. While we waited, we traveled, Venice, Nice, Lisbon. We danced, laughed, took calendar-worthy photos. And I began to heal. But on a beach in Portugal, my phone buzzed. An unknown number. Grandma. It was Emily, my youngest granddaughter. She cried. I found you. I saw the podcast. I just want to talk. The past wasn't done with me yet. I told her I needed time. My hand shook so badly, Ruth had to take the phone. That night, under the Lisbon sky, we sat in silence. She sounded sincere, Doi said. Maxine warned, she's still one of them. But I couldn't stop thinking about Emily, the quiet one, the garden helper, the bird questioner. And deep down, I knew this story wasn't over. I had held on to her drawings and her little crayon letters. She was the only one who kept calling me, right up until Karen completely cut me off from the grandkids. Now she was 16, nearly grown, maybe finally old enough to understand things for what they really were. Or maybe it was just another trap. 2 days later, a message came through. Just a photo. It was my old house, though it looked nothing like I remembered. The porch was bare, the rose bushes gone. The shutters that George and I had painted sky blue one summer were now a lifeless beige. Below the image, the message said, they trashed it. I'm sorry. I stared at it for a long while. My throat tightened like I was being choked. They hadn't just sold it, they tore it apart, wiped away everything I had worked so hard to build. I showed the photo to the girls. Ruth turned away, Doi's eyes filled with tears, and Maxine stared at it, flicked her cigarette, and said, time to go public. The interview with Megan Luce took place in a quiet cafe overlooking the Douro River. She showed up with her gear in a plain backpack, no makeup on, just warmth in her voice when she sat down and said, tell me everything. And I did. I talked about all the sacrifices, the long hours I worked, the birthdays I made special with barely anything but hope. I told her how I was lied to, manipulated, betrayed, how they dragged me from my own home like I was just a piece of furniture. When I was done, Megan held my hand and said, you're not alone. Your story, it's going to wake people up. A week later, the podcast aired. It blew up. Hundreds of thousands listened. Women from all over reached out, survivors, daughters full of regret, sons who had watched their mothers slowly disappear. I became a symbol, not because I asked to, but because I made it through. The next day, Karen messaged me, "How dare you?" Luke called twice. David left a bitter voicemail. I deleted them all. Then Emily reached out. She had left home, was staying with her aunt. She said she couldn't look at her mother anymore without hearing my story in her head. She wanted to meet. Not in Texas, anywhere else. "Please," she wrote, "I just want to know you again." Maxine warned me. Ruth wasn't sure. Doi held my hand and said, "Sometimes healing starts with opening one more door." So, I chose Savannah, Georgia. A place I'd always wanted to see. A city full of magnolias and memories. We flew there the following week. Emily waited in Forsyth Park, sitting under an old oak. When she saw me, she stood up with tears in her eyes. She looked like Karen used to, before the cold set in. But there was something else, something honest and aching in her face. "Hi, Grandma," she said. My voice nearly broke. "Hi, sweetheart." We walked for hours. She asked about George, my childhood, and the day they took me. She had found my letters by accident, searching Karen's files. She confronted them, and Karen slapped her. "I couldn't stay," she whispered. I looked at her, still part girl, part woman, and something broke open in me. I didn't want revenge. I wanted peace. Not for them, for me. I hugged her hard enough to leave fingerprints on her soul. That night, I told the girls everything. Ruth wiped a tear. Doi smiled gently. Maxine just said, "Well, damn. Maybe there's hope for one of them." We stayed in Savannah for a week. Emily joined us for dinners, walks, and late-night stories. It was strange at first, but then it became something beautiful. Like breathing after holding your breath for too long. One night, she asked, "What if we made a place for women like you?" I didn't answer right away. But the next morning, over coffee, I said, "We're going to build it." I had the money. I had the name, the Eleanor Grace Foundation. And now I had a granddaughter ready to stand with me. The past had scarred me, but the future, it burned like fire. The idea started on a napkin, during breakfast. Emily doodled stars around the name. Her writing still young, mine firm and weathered. We didn't know where to begin, but we knew who we were fighting for, women who'd been forgotten, abandoned, erased by the very people they loved. Emily took the lead. Her mind was sharp and fierce, just like George's. She registered the foundation, made the website, wrote everything for it. She reached out to advocates, legal teams, even launched a GoFundMe that went viral. Stories poured in. Donations followed. We began with a pilot program, free legal help, support groups, packets for women in nursing homes. My name on that homepage didn't feel real, like meeting a version of myself I hadn't known before. Media outlets kept calling, Newsweek, NPR, CNN, but I said no to most. I wasn't a story. I was a woman who survived and built something out of the wreckage. I said yes to one interview, though, for a local Savannah station. The reporter asked gently, "If you could say one thing to those who put you in that home, what would it be?" I looked at the camera and said, "I forgive you. But I won't forget who I became because of you." That clip went everywhere. Karen left me a voicemail after 6 months of silence. I never listened. I didn't need to. Luke tried suing me, said I stole the house. The judge dismissed it in 10 minutes. I didn't even show up. Maxine did, and from what I heard, she tore him apart in court. David moved away. I haven't heard from him since. That's fine with me. Emily became both my shadow and my light. When we opened our first foundation home in upstate New York, we named it Grace House. A safe place for women hurt by family, forgotten by those they trusted. I cried so hard at the ribbon cutting Ruth had to hold me up. Ruth found love, yes, Ruth. Met a man named Dennis on a cruise. Terrible dancer, but made her laugh every day. Now they split time between Florida and shuffleboard. Joy started a blog on grief and healing. She ends every post with the line, "And still Eleanor rises." Maxine became our legal director. She's unstoppable, lipstick and all. And me? I keep telling my story. I keep building. Before the year ended, I went back to see my old house. Not to fight, not to mourn. Just to see. A new family lived there, baby swing in the front. I stood across the street, a scarf on my head, sunglasses hiding my eyes. I smiled. That place wasn't my home anymore. Home was wherever I stood in my truth. Wherever women gathered to lift one another up. Wherever Eleanor Grace Miller refused to be erased. And as I turned to leave, a breeze swept past me, smelling faintly of roses. I closed my eyes. I could almost feel George's hand in mine. "We did it," I whispered. "We made it." And in that quiet moment, I knew, it wasn't the end of my story. It was only just beginning. Sometimes, I just listened, because I had come to understand something powerful. Redemption isn't always about surviving what they did to you. Sometimes, it's about choosing to become someone they never imagined. Someone stronger. Someone free. Someone unforgettable. I'm Eleanor Grace Miller, and this is my legacy. Not found in money or buildings, but in the fire I lit and passed on to the women who carry it forward now. That first Thanksgiving at Grace Haven stays with me. The sunlight streamed through tall windows, turning the wooden floors a warm gold. The scent of cinnamon, roasted turkey, and fresh cornbread filled the house. Outside, fall had started to show, leaves in deep reds and bright oranges covered the grass and crunched with every step. On the porch, wind chimes whispered stories into the breeze. Inside, there was laughter, not the polite kind, but real laughter from deep in the belly. The long table, donated by a woman once told by her husband she wasn't good enough to host, was now full of mismatched plates and glowing candles set between serving bowls. 22 women sat around it. Some wore pearls, others jeans, but all of them wore hope across their faces. Grace Haven had only been open for 3 months. Just 3. And already, lives had shifted. Olivia had escaped a marriage that silenced her for 35 years. Harriet had been left homeless after her son emptied her savings. Rosa, at 71, had finally learned to read, and now left sticky notes around the house with her favorite words, light, soft, beginning. I sat at the head of the table, not because I chose to, but because they insisted. They said I was the reason they were here. But looking at them, I knew the truth, they were the reason I felt whole again. I stood to make a toast, not a speech, just a few words. I lifted my glass, apple cider with a bit of bourbon, like George used to make. This year, I said, I didn't lose everything. The room grew quiet. I found what I was missing. I looked around, at Ruth and Dennis holding hands, at Maxine carving the turkey like she was running a courtroom, at Joy handing out her homemade pie and wiping tears from a young woman's face. Emily, my granddaughter, stood behind me, my light. I found myself, I said, my voice shaking. I found a family, not one made by blood, but chosen. I found purpose in the ashes. I told them, this isn't just a home for the broken. It's a home for those rising. The room filled with the sound of glasses clinking, soft weeping, and applause that felt like music meant just for us. Later, as the sun dipped low and candles flickered out, I stepped onto the porch. Emily joined me. "You never told me what you wished for," she said, nudging me. "What do you mean?" I asked. "That night in Alaska," she said. "When you let go of George's letter, what did you wish for?" I smiled. "I wished that one day, someone would truly see me for who I was." I paused. "Now, I wish that someone else sees their own worth before it's too late." She leaned into me, head on my shoulder. "You're changing the world, Grandma." I shook my head gently. "No, baby," I whispered. "We are." And we sat there, 2 generations of fire, watching stars appear one by one, little promises across the sky. Winter arrived gently in Savannah, softer than the biting chill of Texas I remembered. Mornings were crisp, the air smelled of pine and clove, blankets were pulled tighter, walks grew slower under gray skies. Grace Haven glowed with string lights and quiet little miracles. Each room held a story now. One belonged to Clara, who came with nothing but a suitcase and a photo of her late husband. Her children had drained her account and left her alone in a motel. At first, she barely spoke. But after some time in the garden, her hands found the soil again, and then her voice. Another room belonged to Naomi, a former nurse forced into assisted living. Now she led chair yoga in the mornings, helping hearts learn to trust again. Every time someone new arrived, I saw a version of myself. That woman sitting in the beige nursing home, suitcase at her feet, losing her grip on hope. And each time I felt a little stronger. In January, we held something special, our first night of names. It was Doy's idea, and it turned out to be beautiful. We stood in a circle, each of us holding a small candle. One by one, we spoke the name of a woman we wanted to honor. A mother, a friend, or even a version of ourselves we had let go. When my turn came, I simply said, Eleanor Grace Miller, the one who stayed quiet for too long. I let the silence stretch after that, not in mourning, but as a sign of respect. That version of me deserved to be remembered. She kept going when no one noticed. She kept loving when it hurt. And when it finally mattered, she stood up. Afterward, Emily found me in the kitchen, cheeks still wet with tears. "I want to write a book," she said. "About you. About all of this." I laughed. "You think people want to read about a grandma who sold her house out from under her kids and ran off to Italy with a bunch of retired rebels?" She didn't blink. "Yes. Because those women are out there, women who feel stuck, too old, too broken to change. I want them to know it's never too late." That night, I picked up a spiral notebook and started writing, memories, lessons, truths no one tells you until you're almost out of time. I didn't know if it would become a book, a blog, or a box of letters for future hands. I just knew one thing, my voice wasn't going quiet again. Then February brought news we didn't expect. The foundation had been nominated for a national award, the Women of Strength Legacy Grant. It was given to organizations that uplifted older women with dignity, voice, and independence. Maxine read the email out loud in the common room. Ruth screamed, Doy cried, and Emily danced me around the coffee table. A week later, a local news team came back, not just to talk to me, but to talk to all of us. The women of Grace Haven shared their stories, and the camera captured something bigger than words, our strength. When the segment aired, we got more than 3,000 emails in just 2 days. Thousands of women reaching out, daughters trying to help their mothers, grandmothers asking if a Grace Haven existed near them. We were overwhelmed at first. But then we got to work. We opened another home in Asheville, then one in Michigan, and planned a third for Oregon that fall. Through it all, I kept my morning ritual, coffee on the porch, notebook in my lap, a quiet prayer. Not for justice anymore, but for joy, for the life I never thought I'd get. Every now and then, I'd see a woman walking up our path for the first time. Shoulders low, eyes wary. I'd rise to greet her, take her hand and whisper just loud enough for her soul to hear, "You're not lost. You're just getting started." Spring came early that year. It was like even the trees and flowers were eager for new life. Grace Haven bloomed, wisteria wrapped around the porch rails, daffodils burst up like little trumpets of hope. Everything smelled like beginnings. And me? I, Eleanor Grace Miller, was finally ready to write the next chapter. Emily's book idea had taken shape. We called it Not Done Yet. She took my stories, my letters, and pieces of the women we'd met, and turned them into something more beautiful than I could have dreamed. It wasn't just a memoir. It was a declaration. We launched it with a garden party at Grace Haven. We invited every woman who had ever walked through our doors, and their families. Even some of the children who had once been the reason those women needed us. People change. Not all, but enough. Enough to keep faith in the world. Karen didn't come. David didn't write. Luke sent a bitter message through a lawyer, claiming the book defamed him. We didn't respond. But Emily's parents, her father and stepmother, came. They brought flowers. "Thank you," her father said, quietly. "For giving her back to us stronger." That night, once the guests had gone, the lights had been taken down, and cake plates were soaking in the sink, I sat on the porch again. Same old chair. Same mug. Same stars. And I finally let myself remember it all, not just the pain, but the love, too. George. The babies I once rocked. The silence I had endured. The fight I found. And the legacy I had built with worn, unshakable hands. Maxine joined me, blanket on her lap. Ruth and Dennis waved goodnight from their cottage across the garden. Doy was inside, already working on a new poem about blooming again. Maxine nudged my arm. "You did it, you know." "Did what?" I asked. "You rewrote the ending." I looked at her, eyes soft with the peace that only comes after the storm. "No," I said. "I just started telling the truth." She chuckled, that rough, no-nonsense laugh that had carried us through the hardest nights. And in that moment, I felt it. I wasn't waiting anymore, not to be seen, or chosen, or heard. I was fully here. For every woman who had ever been made small, silenced, or forgotten, I left these words not carved in stone, but in the hearts we'd touched. You're not too old. You're not too late. You're not done yet. And neither was I. The day the award letter arrived, I was in the kitchen with Emily, dusted in flour and sunshine. We were laughing, God, really laughing, about something Ruth had said the day before, how her dentures had launched across the table mid-Scrabble. Then the mail came. Just a plain cream envelope, nothing fancy, with our names printed neatly on the front, Eleanor G. Miller and Emily Grace Weston, the Eleanor Grace Foundation. Emily opened it. Halfway through, her hands began to shake. She passed it to me, wordless. I read the first line slowly. Congratulations. You have been awarded the Women of Strength Legacy Grant. My knees gave, and I sank into the nearest chair. Emily knelt beside me, eyes shining. You did this, she said. I touched her cheek. No, baby. We did. We held a celebration that weekend, not for the grant, but for what it meant. For survival. For sisterhood. For joy. Over 100 women came, some with walkers, some with silver braids and painted lips, some who had arrived at Grace Haven with nothing but their name. They hugged. They cried. They danced. Ruth made a flower crown and placed it on my head, daisies and ivy. Silly, maybe. But I wore it like a queen. Because now I understood what it meant to be one. Not to rule, but to rise, and to help others rise with you. That night, alone in my room, the certificate lay beside George's last letter. A photo of us from our wedding day sat nearby, young, eyes bright, so unaware of what was ahead. I looked at him and whispered, "I did it, George. You were right. I was stronger than I ever knew." A knock at the door, soft. Emily peeked in. "Just wanted to say goodnight." I patted the bed beside me. She curled up the same way she did when she was little, head on my shoulder. "I'm proud of you," I said. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. "You turned ashes into light." We sat in silence, that kind of silence that doesn't need filling. When she left, I walked to the window and looked out at the garden, the place where so many of us had begun again. And I realized something deep in my bones. This wasn't a second chance. This was my life, the one I was always meant to live. And with the moon glowing above and the scent of spring thick in the air, I smiled. Because I had finally come home. Not to a place, but to myself. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, and if you've got a story, share it in the comments. Because your voice, it matters.